You're ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks live stream. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the products you depend on. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about devices, obsess over pharmacy, this is a live stream for you. I do have to specify that I am an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. I am a pharmacist, but I'm not your pharmacist. My guest is a scientist, but he's not your scientist. So this is neither legal, clinical, or scientific advice. We're doing this because they're a lot of fun and because we find ourselves learning something new every single time. But it's always nice to know when someone's listening, if someone's asking questions. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you want to ask our guest questions, please feel free to do so. And if you like the conversation, please share the video as well. If you want to find me, you can always reach out to me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Today's live stream is going to be really fun. We've had our guest on several times before, but he never fails to disappoint and brings some really, really interesting conversations. He is a prolific entrepreneur, and every time I talk to him, he seems to be conquering a whole new world. So our guest for today is the founder of the ACMA, and for those of you who don't know that, that's the premier institution to get certified to be a MSL. So it's definitely a conversation that you want to be a part of, I have so many questions about that today. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest for today, Will Soliman. How are you, Will?
Very good. Thanks, Darshan. Always good to see you.
Always a pleasure. When before we started, we were having a couple of different conversations, and we were talking about the best way for me to talk to you and ask questions and sort of do the interview, which segued into the idea of different interviewing styles, and that led to this conversation of how different generations approach the job function and how they interview differently. And I understand that you guys put out a paper recently, which, again, if you send me the link to it, I'd be happy to post that. But for now, could you talk a little bit about what were the boomer MSLs like? What are the Gen X MSLs like? Millennials and now Gen Z.
Sure. So yeah, we put out a paper a few weeks ago about the Gen Z MSL. And the Gen Z MSL is the MSL that's, the newest generation of medical science liaisons, and really just talking about how they approach the role differently, what their expectations are, and then what employers should expect as well. And one of the things that I think a lot of employers don't necessarily anticipate or understand, especially if you're a Gen Xer or a boomer, is that what's important to Gen Z employees in general or Gen Z MSLs is slightly different. And again, I'm painting a broad, kind of stroke, and I'm aware of that. But generally speaking, they approach the role very differently because you have to remember that they grew up in a world where really they had very easy access to technology. And so, therefore, they had very easy access to information, and they're very used to interacting in a virtual environment. And so, for a lot of them, this idea that we need to be in person to build a relationship. And by the way, even on the healthcare provider side, we need to be in person to try to get information that's valuable from a pharmaceutical company isn't as important. I'm not saying that it's not important, but it's not as important as maybe the Gen Xers believe it is. And I'm a Gen Xer, right? And so I was of the generation that we were out and we were actually meeting face to face with key opinion leaders, and that was really the standard, right? That's what counted the most, was that you were somebody that would be, somebody that would go out and have these face to face interactions, and those are the ones that counted the most. But today, it's really different, especially after COVID. Um, and so the mindset is very, I think, hard sometimes to understand from the employer standpoint in terms of what the Gen Z or millennial MSL, or just in general, Gen Z or millennial employees looking for. And for them, a lot of it really is about quality of life and the impact that they're making, in the community as a whole. I've found less than, for example, it is on compensation. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think that's an advantage. But their expectations in terms of support and training, and communication are different. They're very, very different. And because they grew up in a much, different world. And I think that's something that a lot of employers overlook.
So you talk about this decrease in importance of face-to-face meetings and this new desire. And I'm saying new, but I mean we've all the generations, including Gen X and even Boomers, always aimed for this quality of life. What I'm hearing you say is there's now a renewed focus on this quality of life. What I find interesting is this decrease in face-to-face. However, it's one of those other similar things. I think we saw that also with the millennials, in that I think picking up the phone call became a thing of the past. Everyone wants to just text.
Yes.
Like if you pick up the phone call, talk to a millennial, the first reaction is, "Why are you calling me? Who died?" And and to me, that's so like I like making that phone call because it makes me feel like I'm actually connecting with someone. But I also know my friends who are boomers will go, I want that face-to-face conversation because it builds a different rapport. But is that a demonstration of the generations, or is that just since technology has enabled these conversations, we as the older generations simply don't value it as much as someone who grew up in it?
Yeah, but well, it's what you're used to. So, if you were an MSL back in 2001, 2002, you were out there, with your MapQuest, and you printed out your MapQuest and you were trying to get to
Taking
your.
me back there with MapQuest. Yeah,
Remember that?
I
And
do.
it would always like the last two steps of the MapQuest route always messed me up. I don't know about you, but it was like good. It's like the last two steps, but it was different. It was really about shaking the person's hand, sitting down, breaking bread with them, having that rapport, getting them to trust you, etc., and build that connection, at an emotional level and kind of a humanistic level. And that was so important. And I remember even the metrics back in the day for many companies I worked for, they definitely placed a lot more emphasis on face to face. Today that's very different, right? Today, I'm hearing in some cases, an MSL will go to a doctor's office and they'll be taken to a room where they're actually having a meeting. The doctor's down the hall in the office, right? But they're having a meeting, but it's on Zoom because of the COVID situation, right? And so, we talk about this new normal. That's something that we've come to accept as a good proxy. And I do think it's going to shape generations to come. Even physicians, I have friends that are millennial physicians, and they'll tell me that, I don't really want to see not just a pharma rep or even an MSL. I just let them text me or send me a link to what they want to share. If I have questions, I'll reach out. And you hear that from a lot of millennial physicians, because again, the way they're looking to get information and what works for them is just different. It's not like your boomer physician or your Gen X physician.
But you say that, and you say that it's a generation thing. I agree with you, but there's a part of me that goes, I get this overabundance of emails, and I get these overabundance of texts, and my cell phone just has all these notifications on there. What I find myself doing is sort of going, I'll get to this, I'll think about this, blah blah blah. If you're an MSL and you send a 3-page long, 15-page long article, chances are the physician who's walking around does not have an immediate need for that bit of information right now, is going to say, I'll get to it later, and possibly never gets back to it because it doesn't affect his or her day-to-day functioning. So my question is, how accurate is this idea that we can have the same impact if we're using text or using like a Zoom, as if you were sort of actually breaking bread, like you said?
I think that's what the industry's struggling with right now. My team just got back from a medical affairs conference, and that was a big topic. They told me this issue of virtual access and being able to build new relationships virtually. And I don't think anyone knows yet, right? The jury's still out. I think that there'll be the ability to build traction in those relationships, but it might be just done differently and at a different kind of time scale, and it will require different interfaces digitally and technologically to make that happen. Which is why a lot of companies now are investing in these digital platforms for MSLs and medical affairs, et cetera. What I do think is going to happen is I think now more than ever MSLs are going to become much more important than pharma sales reps. And I say that, and I know that some people don't like to hear that, but I think now even more important because for two reasons. One, you can't give samples virtually. That's difficult to do unless you're drop shipping samples. And if you are a sales rep, we know that the average time that the sales rep interacts with the physician is very short, less than 2 minutes. So to schedule an actual call or Zoom call with a physician, if you're a rep, that's a challenge because we know most reps are cold calling. They're not like MSLs who are scheduling an actual appointment. So I think that's going to be a big reason why you're going to see even a more renewed focus on MSLs and medical affairs professionals. But I think those Gen Z MSLs, in particular, Millennial MSLs, the way that as an industry we need to train them and the way we need to, you know, cultivate their career is different. They care more about, things like the culture at a company. I'm not saying we didn't, but I think that's a much bigger issue to them is the culture at a company, what the company does for work-life balance, how committed the company is to other issues. There could be, like, for example, right now in the pharma industry, one of the biggest thing now that people are focused on is environmental sustainability. Back in the day, that wasn't a major focus. Today it is. And I'm not saying it's a negative thing, it's a good thing. But again, it's just a shift in focus. So how you connect with those folks, that new generation, is different.
So you talk about culture, you talk about these Zoom meetings, and as part of that, we talk about these the sending of say these links to physicians going, this is an article you may find interesting. Obviously, when you start doing that, you start struggling with things like compliance and specifically Sunshine Act issues, where you're going, here's an article. Now, if you send an article where someone has to pay for them, chances are the physician's not going to pay for an article that they received unsolicited. On the other hand, if they receive an article that that they wanted, they would hope that it would already be paid for, and that raises Sunshine Act issues. From a compliance standpoint, have you seen new issues being raised that you find yourself going, maybe we need to talk about that a little bit more?
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, the biggest thing now is with social media and so many patients posting on social media about their experiences with the drugs that they're taking or devices that they're using, and what the company does about that. Number one, number two, with KOLs now also having a voice online. So again, now more than ever, you have digital KOL fingerprint, right? The digital KOLs now are out there on Twitter, Doximity, other platforms. They're posting things, they're sharing ideas. And from a compliance standpoint, if you hear something or something's brought to your attention, what do you do with that? The other area I think is data and why and how you ascertain data. Why do you want a specific kind of, so for example, if you're in medical affairs, why do you want that data? What's the intention behind the need to, get that information and analyze it? And what is that going to be used for towards what strategy? The reason why I bring that up is because, see, internally in medical affairs, we see a distinction from sales. As a former medical affairs, but we see it. But I could tell you, and again, people might get upset to hear this. Outside, they don't. So I talk
I
all the
agree.
time. Yeah, right. You know this better than me. I talk to people on the Hill. I talk to people. I was telling you the last time when we met, I had just come from the U.S. Attorney General's meeting. They don't see any distinction. So they are looking very, very closely at what medical affairs does because, to be honest, they're worried that medical affairs is just, a substitute for sales disguised as medical, with this idea that they're providing objective education. And that bothers a lot of medical people. It bothers me, but it's a fact that this is a major sentiment that people in the regulatory, the government side have.
So it's interesting. We have a comment from Janan. I agree with you. Gen Z is leading the Great Resignation, more vocal than ever about their expectations of passion, purpose, company culture, environment, and work-life integration. I find that last piece really interesting, which is this work-life integration. What used to happen, and until say, I don't know, 3-5 years ago, um, we would call it work-life balance, which implied that there was work and there was life. She used the term work life integration, which is very much a product of what today looks like, which is your work and your life are mixed in together, and you're all either always constantly working or constantly off, depending on your perspective, depending on if you see the glass is half full or half empty. As an MSL, how do you advise new MSLs to turn off if necessary, or can they not turn off anymore?
Well, it's hard to turn off if because again, because of this thing, right? It's difficult to turn off, right? I will say, and I agree with Janan completely. I'll never forget. I interviewed someone one time who was a PharmD, and pharmacist, and she said to me, one of the things I really like about being a remote is that during lunchtime, my husband and I can go out and have lunch together on the patio in the backyard, and I need that. I need to have that. And I respected her for sharing that. Clearly, that was important to her. But what it also revealed to me was the change in thinking, right? It's like back in the day, that wasn't something you necessarily would bring up in an interview. It might make you appear to be someone not committed to the company or not committed to the mission, not fully committed, that you're distracted by these other things. So I like that phrase that Janan used, which is work-life integration, because you have to figure out how you're going to fulfill the responsibilities of your role effectively while still maintaining that balance, with what your needs are personally, whether it's with your children, your spouse, significant other. And that's something that I think before we didn't, I don't want to say we didn't care about it. We just maybe didn't place as much emphasis. There was a very clear delineation. This is what you do at work. When you're at work, this is kind of the focus. Shouldn't take personal calls, things like that. Now, and then you come home and then, you should forget about work and bring your work home. But now there's this kind of like, it's like a mix, like a kind of a soup. And it's good and bad, there's some good to it, but there's some bad to it, right? It could actually be harmful to you to constantly have those triggers and those stimuli. And I would even say addictive. I don't know if you saw the recent study that came out from Facebook. Facebook did its own study where they were showing how they were looking to create an app for kids for Instagram. And what they found was that these apps, they stimulated certain neurotransmitters in the brain, like serotonin, dopamine, and things like that. And long story short is that it was addictive. So even the sound, the notification you hear when you get a new email, it's not just a new notification on Instagram or TikTok or something. Even your email, a message. There's something about that, I guess, in terms of the neuroscience in the brain that triggers this feeling, this good feeling. So there's an addictive element to it, and it can be difficult if you're a millennial or a Gen Z and you've grown up like that since you were 3 on an iPad to break away from it.
So you talk about how people have this work-life integration. You talk a lot about how how Gen Z is looking at jobs differently. I guess my question for you is, it sounds like it's one of those conversations that needs to be had early on. And the idea of having the conversation early on is to set expectations. How are Gen Z individuals interviewing differently than the average, say, millennial or Gen Xer?
So I conduct a lot of interviews. I've been interviewing for the last 20 years at ACMA. If you follow us, you see we're hiring quite a bit and growing. So I interview a lot of people, and absolutely, they're interviewing very differently. One, it's not as formal. The interviews aren't as formal. Two, oftentimes I've had younger folks that will actually tell me in the interview that they need to confer with their parents, for example. Now, that is something that I had not really seen before, but this idea that I got to go back, I got to talk to my parents, or I want to get my parents' perspective. Usually in an interview, you don't see that. So there's a lot more of an informality there. The other thing is the issue of wanting to grow very quickly. So, just recently, I had someone that said to me, just graduated undergrad last year with a bachelor's degree. And the person said to me, I want to be a director or VP in the next year. I was surprised. I think it's good to be ambitious. Okay, I'm all for ambition. Don't get me wrong. But I kind of liken it to, imagine if you didn't know how to swim, and all of a sudden I said to you, Darshan, today we're going to go scuba diving, and you've never done it before. It's kind of the same thing. It would probably be a bad idea. It'd probably be, there'd probably be some kind of bad consequence if you don't know how to swim. You never went scuba diving, and today we're going to go scuba diving and go, a few thousand feet in. It's probably a bad idea. So, I think what sometimes Gen Zs don't realize is that you can't have it now, when you want it and how you want it, and your own time. There's a season for everything, and there's something to say about being able to kind of get in a role and do very well in a role, and really be ready for that. Be ready for that position so that you can maximize your success. So that's kind of how I liken it to. Another analogy would be like, if you have a 3-month-old, you're probably not going to give them chicken and rice, because if you do, they're going to probably get sick. You give them baby food, or you give them, milk, because that's what they can take at that point. Same thing, right? So, you have to grow into a position. And I think sometimes this generation doesn't always recognize that. They don't recognize that you need to take your time and evolve and really mature professionally.
But do you think that I mean I feel like the Gen Z and even the millennials have very different leaders than we did. I mean, me growing up, you growing up, we're probably about the same age. I have no idea how old you are, but we're probably about the same age. And when I looked back, it was Bill Gates, it was Steve Jobs. Those were the people we looked up to. But then you started getting the millennials looking up to a Zuckerberg who was 19.
Right.
And I'm wondering whether it's different when you're seeing people who are super successful running multi-billion-dollar corporations and they are 19 years old. So what's wrong with aiming to be fresh out of pharmacy school, having a PhD or whatever it is, and saying, I want to be a VP in a year and a half? So how do you help them rebalance? I mean, here's Janan's comment: Gen Z's bold and fearless. Isn't this emblematic of bold and fearless?
That's a great point. Part of it is because the portrayal on social media is that, or in the media in general, is that those examples like you gave, right, with like Zuckerberg and others, those are exceptions. And I think that's something important to understand. Yes, I'm all for ambition, and yes, if you work hard enough, potentially you might be able to achieve that level of success. But let's be honest, those are exceptions. It's like someone who plays basketball. Not everybody who's playing basketball is going to become an NBA star. Yes, it's possible, but those are generally far few in between.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Gen Zs don't recognize. And because everyone now has a platform. Remember, the other difference is everybody today has a platform. So even my 10-year-old son the other day said to me, "I'm on TikTok. I want you to follow me." And he's
I
10 years.
love it.
Yeah, and he's like, I want you to follow me. I want to build my brand. And he's 10. And he was able to say that, articulate that. So, his perspective is that anyone can be famous, and any level of fame or having that voice in the world is important. And that, if you don't have that, you're not important. So it creates this mindset that if I'm not a VP in 2 years, you know what? That means I'm not successful, because like Janan just wrote, I could be a YouTube billionaire at 15. I could be a gamer, at 17. And one of my friends is an attorney. One of his clients is 22 years old. He's a gamer. He makes $10 million a year gaming. So yeah, of course, if you're that age and you're making that much money gaming, yeah, to you, working a role, if you're also a Gen Z, or you're working a role making $70,000, you may look at yourself and think, yeah, this is not really successful, or I want to get to something, whatever that something is that you envision as being, the idea of success. But I actually think it's a detriment to the generation, and they're going to be disappointed, and they're probably unhappy to hear me say that, because again, those are rare exceptions. Most kids who are gaming today, most of them are not going to be professional gamers. That's just the truth.
You're probably right. I actually agree with you. But let me ask you a question that removes old fogies like you and me from the equation here. So you and I look at that and go, that's a little too ambitious. But if I was a Gen Zer, I can't even remember. Is the next one Gen Alpha? Is that what it is? I can't keep track of it. But
Yeah.
yeah. If I was a Gen Zer and I became humble, for lack of a better term, or more realistic, and I said, you know what I'd like to do is I'd like to become a manager in the next year, a more realistic goal, if you will. Do you think he or she would get lost in the shuffle because now the interviewers are saying, this person wants to be a VP, this person wants to be a director. You're just aiming to be a manager. You're not committed to the job in the same way as your peers are. And do you think that just the fact that the pool has changed changes what the arms race almost of how you present yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does, because almost everyone that I talk to has now a side hustle. So it's
Yeah.
like, I'm a, I want this position, for example, I want this sales position, but on the side I have an Instagram channel and I have 10,000 followers, and really what I want is I want to grow my fashion brand. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a good thing. But what I'm saying is that you can't expect that everybody in this generation, millennials, Gen Z, etc., that everybody's going to be an influencer. Everybody's going to be successful at that. I think in some ways, what we've done is we've created this generation where everybody thinks they deserve a trophy. Right? So if you're, when you're, and my kids, are products of that, where everybody gets a trophy. And my perspective is that that's detrimental. It actually sets you up for disappointment. You need to be ambitious, but you also have to know what your limitation is. We all have talents and skills and abilities, but they're not endless. We do have some limit in terms of what
Yeah.
we can do. So I don't know if you can see here. I have a keyboard here,
Mm-hmm.
and probably you can't see this here. I love music, and I have this. It's a flute. So I'm originally from Egypt. This is a flute. It's an Egyptian flute. It's actually a bamboo flute about 5,000 years old, and I love to play music, and I wanted to pursue music. But what I came to learn and understand was, while I like music, and I am a musician, I play music. There was only a certain level I could reach, right? So I had to find other more realistic means to grow, professionally. And that's just the way it is. Not everybody is going to be a professional musician or a professional singer. it's not going to happen. I think it's a disservice to tell people that. I really do.
I generally have to agree with you. I, as you know, we usually aim for these to be about 15, 20 minutes. We're at 30 already. So I do need to wrap up. However, we didn't get a chance to talk about how ACMA is growing and the new board members you have. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that next time and what that looks like. I also, as you know, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. So the first question is the one we're already answering right now, which is how can people reach you? And so for those people who are listening, it's william@acmainfo.org. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Perfect. Also, there is a new event that you're going to be having, which is the ACMA Annual Summit in spring of 2022.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, really excited about that. So this is actually going to be our first inaugural event happening in the spring, where we're going to bring together key opinion leaders to talk about kind of the latest and greatest in different therapeutic areas. We're also going to have a track for folks in medical affairs, the MSL side, in terms of focusing on your career and how do you build and grow your career. So really excited about it, and looking forward to seeing all my colleagues in the space and really having just a great time and networking. We're also going to give awards out and have a gala just commemorating the folks that got board certified. So it'll be fun. Love to have you there, Darshan. You're always invited.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm going to try to get there. I assume it's going to be live.
It will be live. Yeah, we'll probably look to do something for folks virtually as well, just to have access to it. So it'll kind of be dual, which is what a lot of people are doing. But it'll be live. The plan is to have it live. Yeah.
There you go. As you know, I'm going to ask you 3 more questions. What would you like to ask the audience?
What would I like to ask the audience? I'm curious whether the audience agreed with some of the sentiments or comments that we made or I made around Gen Z. I'm just curious what others have to say, what they've observed about the Gen Z kind of workforce. I'd always love to hear just kind of their perspective on that.
I'll answer from my perspective. I haven't had as much exposure to Gen Z as I'm guessing you have, so my experiences are limited. The extent I've had it, though, I actually agree with you. They tend to be ambitious. They tend to want to have clout, online clout, for lack of a better term. They want to be the best version of themselves, all of which are good things. But I worry for them in that they've pushed themselves to a certain limit that is unsustainable, and that reflects itself in the context of wanting to be VP within 1 year of graduating, and also and you see mistakes like that in other conversations where I've seen people who actually did that, and turns out they weren't qualified and they were being so there was this one agency, I'm not going to talk about it, but it's a Department of Justice issue where a 27-year-old, 25-year-old was VP of this large multi-billion-dollar corporation, and turns out that they were doing it all wrong, and now they're being sued by the Department of Justice because you don't know what you don't know yet. You don't have the life experience to go, this doesn't seem right.
Right.
So you have to, unfortunately, as human beings, we have to go through the goods and the bads, the ups and the downs, to avoid to avoid making those mistakes. We have Jennifer Gershman, who's actually definitely agree about setting realistic goals. So I think overall I agree. Jennifer seems to agree. So that would be my response to you. The second question, what is something you learned in the last month?
Something I learned in the last month. Trying to think. It was something that my son told me that I didn't know about pizza, and I'm trying to remember what it was. He said he taught me something about pizza, like the origin of pizza, but it was something related to that. I can't remember exactly now, which is which is a bad thing, because the question is, what did you learn? I have to go back and ask him, but it was something that he mentioned to me that I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
Oh, that is actually kind of cool. Which takes me to the last question, which is, what's something that made you happy in the last week?
Pizza.
Pizza. There you go.
You know what made me very happy? I found out that we're on Wikipedia. So our board certification is now on Wikipedia under the Medical Science Liaison entry, which is pretty cool. They I guess recognized us as really the standard for the industry. So that was nice.
You're officially legit.
That's right.
Very, very cool. Will, it was wonderful as always having you on. I hope you'll consider coming back again.
Yeah, and we have to bring maybe one of our board members back. I'd love for them to be part of the conversation.
I'd love for that to happen.
Yeah, we should
definitely plan for that.
Yes.
Well, it was great talking to you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.